Hi. It's so nice to be in Miami because this time of year, London is dark by 4:30 in the afternoon. So it's quite nice to be here. I work for a company called Hub Culture, which is a social network. It was founded way back in 2002, which was kind of early in the world of online social networks. But it's grew and developed in a very different way because it's really been geared around live interaction and sort of the merger of online and physical places. And because it's a global network with a global community of people who are largely sort of self-identified as post-national, the need for a new type of currency sort of rose within the community that we have. And that got us thinking a lot about how economics and money are changing. So I want to ask you guys a question tonight. What is money? We all kind of think we know what money is because most of us probably have it in our pocket. And it really is like three things. It's a store of value, it's a means of exchange, and it's a marker of wealth. Now, the fact is that money is changing, and it's always been changing. But we tend to see it a little bit like this kind of big monolithic idea, kind of gets all intertwined and wound up in a sort of centralized construct. And the fact is that we need it because we need to eat, and we need shelter, and we need lots of things that money buys us. But why? Why is money centralized? We've been taught for over 600 years to believe that money can only come from a single source, generally the nation state. But the reality is that money is changing, and it has always been changing. So I'm going to take a couple minutes to take you on a little historical tour of some old types of money, and then we're going to look at how the changes that are happening in money now are affecting the economy at large. The key point that we're going to get across today is that the idea of centralization versus decentralization in money. Centralization is the way that we think of money now. It comes from a centralized location and is distributed widely. But the internet is changing what money is and how money is measured and how money is used. It's decentralizing it. So we're going from this to something that could be a little bit more like this. Maybe not this happy, but we're moving to a world with lots and lots of different types of currencies. And a centralized world to a decentralized world in terms of money. So let's look at this. This is from 610 BC. It's the oldest coin in the world. It's called a Lydian lion. And it was actually sort of invented by Croesus, who was sort of the king of the Lydians. And he lived somewhere between Greece and the edge of China, which would sort of be the sort of far western edge of Asia. And you've heard the term rich as Croesus. That's because this is the guy that sort of invented money as we know it in terms of coins. This was the predecessor for many types of future currencies. The Greeks, the Romans, all types of money came from these coins. The first paper money came in actually around 800 AD, but it wasn't really used as a currency. It was called flying paper. But the first, and that was obviously in China, 960 AD was the first paper currency from the Song dynasty, and it was called jiaozi. And this was used by merchants and others who wanted to trade because gold and silver were too heavy to carry around. But what happened was that within a short period of time, inflation in the printing of this paper money caused wars and other sort of problems to happen because they couldn't control the supply of money. Similarly, barter economies were really popular here in North America. The Mesoamericans used everything from feathers to cocoa beans to barter their way through their economies. The first paper money in Europe came in 1661 from the Bank of Palmstruck. Now the issue here was that they hadn't had very much practice printing money, and they just started printing it as an alternative to something called a tallet, which is a copper kind of coin. But within a few years, Johann Palmstruck was in jail, and the bank was bankrupt because they essentially printed too much money. And then people who had it tried to redeem it, and they didn't really have very much luck with that. That later became the Central Bank of Sweden. 1779, we probably are taught to think that the first currency here in America was the dollar, but it's actually something called the continental currency. It was issued in 1775, and similarly, they had a similar experience. Within 4 years, it was worth 1% of its original note value. And once the country was established of the United States, they traded it in for bonds at about 1% of its original book value. But it did help to finance the revolution, which was quite helpful. In 1999, the euro was introduced. Now this was the first sort of large e-currency. It started out for 3 years as purely a digital currency, and it's now the largest currency in the world. There are about 500 million people in the world who use the euro on a regular basis, or at least a currency that's based on or pegged to the euro. And in Europe, there are 387 million people who are using this currency. So it's not the largest currency in the world in terms of reserve value, because that's still the dollar, but it's growing very quickly. Our currency is called VEN, and it's the world's first carbon-backed currency. It's made up of a basket of currencies, commodities, and carbon futures. And so this makes the currency green in the sense that any transaction that it happens within our community with VEN is essentially carbon-backed and has a carbon offset attached to it. But it also floats on the markets, so the value of VEN is extremely stable compared to, say, a single national currency. And that's because it's made up of a basket of lots of different things. So whereas the dollar and the euro may move, say, 20% against each other in a given year, the euro VEN or the dollar VEN will only move by, say, 2, 3, 4%. So those are all currencies. And as we can see, I mean, if I'm a guy that can invent a currency, trust me, any of you probably could. The key about currencies really is about acceptance and about use. Our community uses our currency, and they like it. They're able to trade it digitally, anywhere, anytime, at zero cost. But why would you want to have an alternative currency? Why do we need alternative currencies? The answer is really here. This is a big idea that takes a little bit to kind of get your head around. But essentially, we live in a world that teaches us that a linear growth economy is what we need to have. GDP growth of 2%, 4%, 6%, 8% a year. And we're taught that the higher the rate of growth that we have in the economy, the better off we all are. This is a linear growth economy. But I would argue that we need to think about moving more towards a circular type of regenerative growth economy, where the point of the economy and the point of our actions isn't just about growth, but it's more about regeneration. So that growth becomes a stage in the whole cycle of the economy and not the ultimate goal that we're all trying to get to. And this is really important because we're living in a world with fewer and fewer resources and more demands on those resources. And if we don't learn to start living in a kind of different way in terms of the way that we think and organize our economies, we're going to have some problems. And we can see some of those problems on a daily basis. So these alternative currencies are going to help us think about value in new ways. And they're going to help us value transactions and relationships and the things that are around us in new ways. I'm not saying that it's going to replace the dollar or the kinds of national-based currencies that we have and that we need. But these alternative currencies are giving people, on a peer-to-peer basis, new ways to trade, exchange, and share. So I kind of think of it like this photo. You have the ocean, which is really kind of like the internet, crashing away at these big national rocks, these state national currencies. And you have all these pebbles that are now on this beach. And the pebbles are kind of like corporate currencies, so your Starwood points, or your Amex rewards, or your miles. And the sand are us, the people. Peer-to-peer currencies are going to enable the exchange and the movement of value between people on an individualized basis. So when we talk about this linear growth versus kind of circular growth, I like to think of it a little bit like this. These are cancer cells. And in a biological state, we tend to think of linear, unchecked growth as a bad thing. It's cancer. But we don't really think about that in terms of our economies. But the same is actually very true, because a lot of work now has shown that the best understanding of economics tend to follow sort of biological concepts. So let's look at a few numbers. We're moving now into a world where peer-to-peer exchange and peer-to-peer value is completely dominant. So these numbers look at private equity. 1970 to 2007, the total value of private equity deals, which is essentially peer-to-peer transactions at the top of the pyramid, were 3.6 trillion. But 75% of that has been done just in the last 10 years. So you can see that you don't really need companies or corporations anymore. What you need and what you have are social networks of people who are raising, allocating, and quite crucially deploying capital on network-based kind of economics. This is a look at the total value of virtual currency trades in China on a daily basis. So this is virtual money, but not necessarily real money. So it's things that are used to buy virtual goods and services in gaming systems, things like your digital sword or other types of game and role play type of things. But it's huge. I mean, $2 billion a day, right? I mean, that's a lot. What's even more interesting is that on an annual basis, the total value of what's called real money trade in virtual systems is set to hit $5 billion this year. That's actually quite a lot of money, and it's something that's growing at a compound rate. So some numbers expect that over the next 3 to 5 years, this will potentially grow into 50, 60, 70 billion dollar market. Now, real money trade is basically taking virtual systems, virtual expenditure, and paying real money for that. So like for Ven, you have to buy Ven at the market rate. For lots of emerging currencies, that's the way it's done. And just to give you an idea, 5 years ago, there were 5 alternative currencies in the world, about. Today, there are over 4,000. So this is the new world. There are going to be lots and lots of new types, different types of money. And this is going to help us move towards a world that moves from, say, supply to demand, which is not very efficient, to a world that is more about demand and then supply. Eventually, a more perfect economy will decide what it wants and then make it so that you don't have waste and excess spare capacity kind of lying around in the economy. So that's what we see, a hub, a kind of more circular type of economic system in the future. And the final result will probably be that we all have our own individual currencies. They'll probably trade on some kind of simplified and single global system, but just like a national currency uses trust and reputation and the size of its network to determine its value, we'll probably have individual currencies that help us value trade and activities with each other. So I may not be very strong in terms of my knowledge about marine physics or something like that, so I wouldn't have very much value against that. But I might know a good place to go for dinner in London and be able to maybe make a little bit more off that. So that's just a little peek into how we see the world of economics changing and the growth of new types of money. Thanks.